Hi everybody, welcome to the Aperture versus Lightroom blog. I'm your host, William Beam. Alright, today we're going to take a look at Lightroom 4 import settings. I've started off here, I've got a nice fresh installation of Lightroom 4. Nothing in it right now, so we're going to come down here to the bottom of this left-hand corner and click on the import button. And right off the bat, it is starting to take a look at a compact flash card that I've got loaded up. You can see over here on this side with the source, Nikon D700. Also up here on the top bar, you can see where it references exactly what we've got. In the middle of the top bar, you can see the options that we have. Copy as DNG, copy, move, add, and so forth. And then, of course, over here is the destination. We can mix up and change all these settings. In fact, we will. So let me first give you a couple of things to take a look at. If I'm looking at devices like my compact flash card or my iPhone, look at the options we have available to us. I can copy it as a DNG, that's Adobe's digital negative, or I can copy it, but the options to move and add obviously aren't there. These are considered temporary media, so they're not going to expect you to be able to have that online and available. However, if I come down here to my RAID and click a little further down to get to my pictures folder, I've got a folder down here with some images called SAM. And then suddenly, not only do we change where we're coming from, but our options over here expand. So I can still copy it as a digital negative, copy them from that folder into my Lightroom catalog. I can move them from that folder so they will only exist in one place at a time, whereas the copy is a duplicate. Or let's say if I click add, it pretty much says you're going to leave these photographs in this folder named SAM along this path, but we're going to tell Lightroom about it so it knows where to manage it. Each time that I click on one of these over here, you'll notice some slight changes on the file handling side. So if I'm just going to add them, it doesn't need to ask me for a lot of other information as far as where they're going to go. It just says up here it's going to my catalog. So the options we have are for the render previews. It's set right now to minimum. That's to give us our fastest time for an import. It's not going to spend a whole lot of time rendering the previews. We've got our other options. We could go with standard to give us a higher quality preview, but that's going to take more time on import. So it depends on your priorities and how much time you have to work. One difference here compared to the current version of Aperture is there's no option to use the preview that's already embedded in the JPEG. And that's fairly new with Aperture. They just came out with that, only a few weeks or a month or so ago. So that's something that I expect that maybe Adobe will bring into a future revision, but it doesn't exist at this point. Another options we've got over here are to apply during import are, do you want to put some development settings, which means do you want to convert it to black and white and do a few other things, and do you want to add some keywords. I'm going to kind of skip over that right now because we've got some other things to look at. If we click on move or copy, or even copy as DNG, you see how we get a much larger set of file handling information over here. So we've still got the same previews. We also get over here this little checkbox, don't import suspected duplicates. That's handy if you've used this card before, imported it, some photos, put it back in your camera, shot some more, you don't want to bring those same photos back in. If you'd like to make a backup on import, you can do that by checking this box and then setting your destination as where you want to make that second copy to. So that way you've got your original files in more than one place. I'm going to deselect that right here. If you like to rename your files, there's two options that you have in Lightroom. You can rename them on import, or you could import them, maybe sort out the ones that you don't want to keep. It's blurry, you got a picture of your foot or whatever, and then rename them in the library module. And the reason that you may want to wait to the library module is so you don't have any gaps in your naming sequence if that's what you use. So let's take a look at some of the options we've got here. I've got it started off with custom settings, but let's say we use one of these that's built in over here, and shoot name, original file number. It's going to come down here and give me a field where I can say, what is your shoot name? This one, the model's name is Sam, so we can just type that. And you can see down here the sample, it'll show you the file name would end up, Sam-0828DNG, since we're copied as DNG. If we move this over to copy, then it'll leave the extension as it is. I've used Nikon file, so that's NEF. The NEF is what they've used for that extension. If we come down here to sequence, then we've got a couple of other options. I can still got my shoot name, but also my start number. By default, it's going to start at 1. You may not want to do that. For example, if you have a shoot that goes on for a couple of different cards, You may shoot like 1 through 600 photos on one card, and you don't want to start the next one over at 1 again. It's, you know, to conflict with the shot that you already have in your catalog. So you can start that number wherever you want to. If you would like to build something that's a little different, you can just click on this and click Edit. And then you have a few options here. So first off, you can delete what's there, and you can type in anything you like. You know, this, if I can type at all. So I could just type in test if that's where I want to start to add a little hyphen in there. And then you've got these different fields, you know, so you can choose, do I want to put in the file name and your numbering? Is it going to be the number of the import that you did, the image number, or the sequence number? And I kind of like these little totals down here as well. They can increment for you. Remember, when you do these, you can change that start number over on the field that we saw in file renaming. Also, you've got items to put in the date. So instead of you just typing in 2012, you can insert this and build your template. So, you know, next year you don't have to remember to go back and change that to 2013. This will keep things up for you automatically. And as far as your dimensions, there's a whole lot, or excuse me, dimensions. I'm talking about additional data. The first one was dimensions. Do you want to put in the GPS data, the altitude? Some of these things aren't going to make sense right now. For example, you probably don't have a rating upon import, but it's nice that you've got a bunch of options right in there. So I'm going to cancel out of that. And we're going to go on down. We've already kind of discussed apply during import, where these would be some of the presets that you could apply to your photographs. Keep in mind, these will apply to every photograph that you have selected. The same is true with your metadata. Let me go ahead and open this one up. And I kind of use a standard one. And something that you want to keep in mind here is, again, this applies to everything you've selected to import. So you kind of want to be careful. For example, if you put a caption in here that you're thinking of one of these photographs, like if I put it here and said headshot, well, that's going to apply headshot to all of these photographs, and clearly they're not all headshots. So you want to keep in mind that everything up here should be generic enough that it applies to every photograph. In this case, you know, as I said, my model's name is Sam. I could put information in here that is Sam. I could say that was shot in the town of Sanford. Model shoot, you know, something that's very generic that applies to every photograph that I have in here, except for, of course, to the ones that I put in my foot. Copyright and information over here. So this is generally useful because you want to put your copyright notice on here, even if you use a Creative Commons license. That's different from your copyright, but let's go into that. So let's say for my copyright, I've got a little preset over here that I just put in copyright symbol, copyright 2012 by William Beam. I changed my copyright status to copyrighted, but my usage terms, I allow Creative Commons, and that's the symbol for it. And of course, for your copyright URL, that would be your web page where folks can reach you. So in this case, I would apply these to my photography site, williambeam.com, rather than the Aperture versus Lightroom blog. And now, up here about the creator, this is where you're going to put in information about yourself. For example, you're going to put in your name, address. If you're going to put these out there and you're worried about having your address out, you might want to consider getting a post office box or setting up an account, you know, like UPS store that used to be mailboxes, etc., since they've merged. But you do want to fill this information out so people have a way to contact you. The reason is you may find someone who finds your photograph and they say, great, I'd love to use that. I'd love to license that. Who took this photograph? If you've got your contact information there, they can get a hold of you and maybe give you some money for it, or at least you have the right of determination to say, yes, I approve that you can use this, or I would prefer that you don't use this. Either way, they want to be able to get a hold of you. There's been a little bit of discussion in past years as far as orphaned works, and that's what happens if you don't put in contact information. If they have no way to determine who you are and where to find you, then the photograph that's floating around the internet may be considered an orphaned work. You can put all these down in presets, and in my case, I've already got a preset out there. So I've got my P.O. box and contact information, so if anybody wants to get a hold of me, that's the public information that I share that they can. So they can email me, you know, call, I've got this number set up. They can mail something to my post office box or even go to my website, whatever is convenient for them. Image location, I tend to wait for the library module simply because I don't want to have a preset for every place that I may shoot. It's easier for me to go ahead and put that in later. But, you know, everybody's got their own unique situation. And much like as we showed in the previous video on Aperture, there is a plethora of information here that you can fill in as far as describing your data that you're putting in. It's like, and even more so, it's like Aperture didn't, to my knowledge, didn't have anything for video settings. So you've got a bit more information here in Lightroom than you did in Aperture. Keywords are another thing that either program will let you put in place. I also tend to hold this off to the until I get into a library module, or after import, I should say, you know, depending on which application I was looking at. It's just easier for me to keep things organized to do it later than it is to do it on import. Again, the only keywords that would apply would be ones that would be very, very generic here. And since I'm going to have to go back and do a more detailed job of keywording later, I don't want to have to do it twice, so I just wait until I'm going to do the whole thing. So I just click done on that. Okay, so no develop settings. I've got my metadata preset. Let me collapse this down, give me a little room. Destination. This is the fun one. I've got the idea that I want to put this in my Lightroom folder under Pictures as part of my catalog. I'm going to copy the files over, so obviously physically they got to reside someplace. A couple of things over here. By default, you see where it says organized by date, and it shows you the date format. Down here, underneath Pictures, since that's the folder that I'm on, you see this folder 2012 and 2012-615. That's what happens when you choose it by date. It creates these folders if they don't already exist. And if I had shot this over a multi-day period, I would have a number of folders underneath 2012 to specify all those different dates. Definitely not what I want to do. So if I click on into subfolder, by this time I could give it a name if I wanted to, but what I'm really going to do is click organize, and I've got a choice, into one folder or by original folders. So if I click into one folder, those little dates go away, and I've still got the field up here, enter name. It's asking me under this pictures folder, where do you want to put it? I could go down here, click on Lightroom, type in Sam up there, or do the same thing by original folders, and then Lightroom is here. You can see this little grayed out thing, it says Sam. I have 99 photographs, same name that I've got over here. Is just simply saying move or copy those images to the same folder name under Lightroom over here. And that's exactly where I want to go. And you can see that we've got other volumes over here. A3 backup is an external drive. My D700, that's my compact flash card. So these are showing me different options of where I could have put it, but obviously, you know, my RAID array is where I want to put it. And once I'm done with that, I can go ahead and click import. You've got a couple of options over here, check all and uncheck all. So in this case, I want all of them to go through, but if I go through and say, look and say, ew, that's a little blurry, I can uncheck that and just do some selections of what I want or what I don't want to go in there. And if you want to take a closer look before you do this, you can click on this button over here and just get a full-size preview of what the image is going to look like and move back and forth if you like. Okay, let's talk about some of the differences between Lightroom import and Aperture import. Much of it, as you can see, is the same. You know, you've got a selection of your choices to import. You've got your selection of photos that you're going to do, and of course your destination where you're going to put it. You can do renames. You can apply effects and metadata on import. And while I'm thinking of it, let me go over here to your preferences. And this one over here, this same thing on preferences, show import dialog when memory card is detected. That's on by default. I personally kind of don't want that to happen. I want to be able to just say when I'm going to do an import. I might have the card left in there from a previous import, and I don't want this thing popping up, especially when there's nothing to do. So that's just a personal note. You've got the option there, same as you did in Aperture. One of the first things I want to point out is the obvious, that copy as DNG is an option we did not have in Aperture. Since Adobe created the DNG file format, it's obvious that they would put it in there, and they can do it here. Aperture is able to import DNG, but it cannot create them. So Adobe has an advantage there if you don't want to use the DNG format. Some of the things that Lightroom doesn't have, which depending upon your needs may or may not be an issue. One is there's no option down here, as there was in Aperture, to run a script. You know, if you're on, where Aperture versus Lightroom, we're all going to be Mac users making that choice. So if you want to run an Apple script there's no options showing up here that makes it easy for you to go ahead and import something that way. Something else that came to my mind was during file renaming, the options we see over here, there was a minor little thing that might be helpful to some people that may not matter to you at all, that your start number, both of them can choose, which number to go with, but the Aperture also gave you the opportunity to increment. So you didn't necessarily have to increment by 1, you could increment by a value of up to 6. So instead of going 1, 2, 3, 4, you could go 5, 10, 15, 20. Again, I don't know that that's going to affect that many people, but it is just one little difference that I saw in there. Another thing that comes to mind is Aperture had a time value based off the time zone. One of the things that I was looking at is if my camera is set to East Coast time and I shoot on West Coast time without remembering to change the time zone of the camera, I may go out there, shoot, do a sunrise shoot, come back and look at it in the program at home and say, why is my sunrise happening at 10 a.m.? It's a handy little tool, one again here that I don't see on import. There was one other aspect of Lightroom versus Aperture that I wanted to bring up is the file types that they support. Out of the box, Aperture will support photos, audio, and video, and Lightroom out of the box will support photos and video. It doesn't make mention of audio, so you might have to look to another option to support your audio files. That brings up another import topic that was on Aperture that is missing from Lightroom, and that is the ability to exclude certain file types during import. So if you've got modern DSLR and you can record photos and video or even audio, then you can exclude those different file types from import if you want to. I don't see that same option over here in Lightroom, so just one more little piece to consider when you're looking at comparing between the two. That wraps up our look at Lightroom import settings. Thanks very much for spending a little time with me, and I'll see you in the Aperture versus Lightroom blog.